It all began like any ordinary school day. A group of high school seniors, buzzing with excitement to celebrate the end of their final year, gathered for one last group photo. Smiles lit up their faces, laughter filled the air, a fleeting moment, meant to capture what they believed were their final days together. But that photo, it became the last anyone ever saw of them. No one heard a thing, no alarms blared. No one even noticed they were gone until the bell rang and the classroom door was found wide open. The students, all missing. By the time authorities arrived, there was nothing but an eerie silence in a single, untouched classroom. No trace of the students, no signs of a struggle, just an empty room. And that photo, a haunting reminder that something unspeakable had happened, something no one could explain. No one knew it then, but in that moment, everything changed. That photo, the last image of them, became the only clue. What happened to them? Where did they go? And why does that photo, frozen in time, still hold a secret no one can crack? The experts are baffled. Theories are endless. But the truth? It's been hidden in plain sight all along, just a few days before their disappearance. This group of students seemed like any other high school seniors on the verge of graduation. They were full of life, laughter, and the kind of enthusiasm that comes with the promise of a future just over the horizon. They'd gather in the cafeteria during lunch breaks, in the school courtyard after class, and sometimes even at the local park, talking about everything and anything that mattered to them in those fleeting moments of youth. Ryan, the class clown, joked about moving to California to chase a career in film. Amber, always the dreamer, talked about studying marine biology, eager to explore the depths of the ocean. Ella, quieter but with a fire in her eyes, had her heart set on becoming a doctor. Then there was Jake, the athlete, determined to play soccer professionally, even if the odds seemed stacked against him. They shared their hopes, their worries, and their plans, discussing everything they wanted to achieve after graduation. There was something special about this group. They weren't just classmates, they were family. Their bonds ran deep. Many of them had been friends since elementary school, and over the years, they had weathered each other's ups and downs through breakups, losses, family troubles, and victories. They always found their way back to one another. When one of them was struggling, the rest of the group rallied around them, offering support, encouragement, and a shoulder to lean on. It wasn't just their friendships that stood out. It was their shared understanding of each other. They knew each other's quirks, their dreams, and their fears. And even though they were all about to go their separate ways after graduation, they promised to stay in touch, to visit, to never let the distance between them break the bond they had formed over the years. And then there were the quiet moments, the ones where they'd just sit together, looking at the sky, not talking, but knowing they were all thinking the same thing. How quickly time had passed, and how uncertain the future really was. The weight of impending change hovered over their conversations, but none of them dwelled on it for long. They were too focused on the present, on the friendships that had defined their lives up until now. They shared inside jokes, memories of field trips and school events, and even the anxieties of preparing for life after high school. Amber had been looking forward to her college applications for months, but even she couldn't hide the nervousness that came with the thought of moving away from home. Ryan would often tease her, telling her she was worrying too much, but Amber knew he was just as nervous about his own future. Everyone had their doubts and uncertainties, but for the most part, they laughed it off, hiding their fears behind jokes and playful banter. Their teachers, too, had witnessed the camaraderie and potential in these students. Mrs. Harris, their history teacher, had often marveled at how well they worked together, how they helped one another both in class and outside of it. She remembered seeing them collaborate on projects, pushing each other to be better, to go the extra mile. They were like a little family, she said, recalling the days leading up to their last week together. It was clear they all cared deeply about each other. There was something special about them. Miss Ellis, the gym teacher, had noticed the same thing. She'd watched them grow from the awkward freshmen they once were into confident, driven individuals. She recalled how Jake had always been the one to motivate the others during practices, always pushing everyone to do their best, even when things got tough. You could see the potential in each of them, she said in her interview, her voice tinged with sorrow. They were on the cusp of something big. I just never imagined it would end like this. And their parents? They felt the weight of what was to come. Ryan's mother, Mrs. Parker, had always known her son had big dreams, but she never imagined they'd be taken away so suddenly. He was so excited, she said. He told me he was going to make it big out there. I never could have imagined. That would be the last time I'd hear him talk about his future. Ella's father, Mr. Moore, had always been proud of his daughter. He'd seen her grow from a shy, bookish child into a confident young woman with a clear sense of purpose. She always knew what she wanted, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was so determined to make a difference. I never thought something like this could happen to her. Even the school counselor, Mr. Davis, had seen it. He'd worked with the group on their college plans, offering advice and support as they navigated the stress of their final year. They had so much going for them, he said quietly. They were the kind of students that gave you hope for the future. And to think that one day they'd just be gone, it doesn't make sense. But none of them could have predicted what was about to unfold. It wasn't just another day. It wasn't just another class. Something was waiting, just out of sight, something that would change everything in an instant. And no one, not even the students themselves, had any idea it was coming. They were just living their lives, making plans, dreaming about the future, and believing in the certainty of tomorrow. But in those last few days before their world shattered, there was a sense of normalcy, a sense of peace that now feels unbearably fragile. And then it was gone. The morning after the photo was taken, the school bell rang as usual. But something was different. The halls, usually buzzing with students, felt eerily quiet. The familiar chatter of lockers slamming and shoes tapping against the linoleum floor was replaced by a heavy, unsettling silence. Mrs. Turner, the school's attendance officer, sat at her desk, going through her morning routine. She clicked her pen, scanning the attendance sheet in front of her. Her eyes paused at the list of names. 10 students, all absent. At first, she thought it was nothing more than a coincidence. Maybe they were all skipping school together. A group decision to cut class. She shrugged it off. High school seniors did that sometimes, though it was strange for the entire group to go missing in unison. As the morning wore on, the absence was noticed by others. Teachers began to inquire. The students hadn't shown up for any of their classes. Miss Hall, the history teacher, stood in front of her empty classroom, feeling a ripple of confusion. She had already marked the students as absent when she noticed something strange. These weren't the usual chronic absentees. These were the star students, the ones who'd never missed a day of school. By lunch, a strange tension had begun to build. The principal, Mr. Davis, made an announcement over the loudspeaker, asking if anyone had seen the missing students or knew where they had gone. It was met with a hushed response. The usual hum of the school was now replaced with uncertainty. Parents began calling the school, checking if there had been any news. Their voices were laced with concern, though no one quite understood why the students hadn't shown up. Still, no one thought much of it. It was early in the semester, and the students had been known to skip class together before. Maybe they were playing some elaborate prank, or maybe they had just needed a break. But as the hours turned into the next day, the missing students remained absent. No one showed up at school the following morning. No one called in sick. Number 1 sent a message. The school was beginning to worry, but it still wasn't entirely clear if something sinister was at play. The search began to spiral out of control. The local police were called in. But the investigation initially moved slowly, as it often did with missing persons cases. At first, it was considered a case of teen rebellion, perhaps a group of students running off to skip town. Yet, as the days dragged on, the theory began to feel more and more unlikely. The first real alarm was raised when their belongings were found in strange places. It wasn't just their books or bags left in the classroom. It was their phones. A couple of the missing students had left their cell phones behind in their lockers. That was odd, given how attached teenagers were to their phones. Why would they leave them behind? It wasn't like them to go anywhere without them. The parents, frantic, began to organize their own search. Flyers went up. Missing person posters plastered every telephone pole, every street corner. The local news picked up the story. Police combed the school, the nearby woods, and the local park. Each lead seemed to dry up as quickly as it came. Days turned into weeks. No one had heard from the missing students. No one had seen them. The town, once bustling with its usual quiet life, was now gripped by a national obsession. The case of the missing high school students became one of the most talked about mysteries in the country. The police were under increasing pressure. They expanded their search efforts. National news outlets interviewed the parents, hoping for any leads. But every single attempt to find the students failed. Then came the breakthrough, or at least it seemed to be one. It started with a ping, a single phone signal. Detective Harris, who had been working tirelessly on the case, stared at the screen of his phone. The signal was weak but distinct. It was coming from a phone that had belonged to one of the missing students, Aiden. The ping was tracked to an empty field about 5 miles outside of town. It didn't make any sense. Why would Aiden's phone be there? And why would it have pinged after he'd been gone for days? A search team was immediately dispatched to the location, rushing to the field in the middle of nowhere. As they arrived, they found nothing. No sign of the students, no clues, no physical evidence that anyone had ever been there. The field was eerily empty, the grass tall and swaying gently in the wind. Nothing had been disturbed, no footprints, no broken branches. The only thing left was the faint ping from Aiden's phone, now silent. The signal had gone cold, and with it, the only lead they had. It made no sense. The field was far from any road, miles from the school, and not a place the students would have chosen to go. No one knew why Aiden's phone had been there or what it meant. But one thing was certain. After that ping, the case grew even colder, leaving only questions that no one had answers to. The disappearance of the class, once thought to be a simple case of students skipping school, had now become a haunting, unsolvable mystery. And the only thing left to cling to was that photograph, the one they had taken before they vanished. As the investigation stalled, the haunting question remained: why had they vanished? What had happened to them in that moment, that photo, and the hours afterward? And why, after all this time, were experts still baffled? The aftermath of the disappearance sent shockwaves through the small town of Northwood. At first, it seemed like a routine case of missing teenagers. After all, the idea of a group running away from their problems wasn't unheard of. But as the hours turned into days and then into weeks, the mystery grew deeper, and the reality of the situation began to set in. The police were the first on the scene, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the case. All of Northwood High's senior class had vanished without a trace. No signs of forced entry, no blood, nothing to suggest foul play, except for the lingering sense that something was horribly wrong. Detective Martin Hayes was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator who had handled missing persons cases before, but nothing like this. At first, he kept his thoughts to himself. But as the days passed and more leads fizzled out, a disturbing realization began to form in his mind. This was no ordinary case. This wasn't a simple disappearance. Something much darker was at play. Hayes and his team sifted through the evidence in the classroom where the students were last seen. There were no signs of a struggle, no indications that the students had been taken against their will. Yet something about the scene didn't sit right with Hayes. He combed through the students' desks and the classroom itself, looking for anything that could give him a lead dot. It was then that he noticed something, small but strange, a pen lying on the floor near the front of the room. It didn't belong to any of the students who had been present. A quick search through the desks turned up nothing else unusual. It seemed trivial, too small to be important, but it nagged at Hayes. He had seen cases where seemingly insignificant details turned out to be the key to cracking the case wide open. He then turned his attention to the students' personal belongings that had been left behind: bags, jackets, and phones. All of them were present, untouched. The students hadn't left in a rush. They hadn't packed up and disappeared in a panic. There was no evidence that they were planning to leave at all. As Hayes continued to pore over the evidence, one of the students' phones rang. It was a call that had gone unanswered before. The number on the screen was local, but it wasn't anyone from the school. The call was traced to an abandoned house just outside of town, a house that had been empty for years. He couldn't ignore the feeling creeping up on him. Was it possible that someone had been keeping track of the students? Someone who knew about the photo, about the last moments before they disappeared? Still, the investigation hit roadblock after roadblock. The days dragged on, and the police department began to lose hope. But then, just as the case was on the brink of being shelved, a break came from an unexpected source. A woman, an old acquaintance of one of the missing students, reached out with a disturbing tip. She claimed that just days before the students had vanished, one of the teens, Sarah Blake, had sent her a strange email. It was short and cryptic, and it didn't make much sense at the time. The woman had thought nothing of it until the disappearances. But after hearing about the case, she realized the connection. Could this be the clue Hayes had been waiting for? He rushed to her home, hoping for more answers. The email, printed and dated, was sitting on her kitchen counter. The words jumped out at him, and for the first time since the case had started, he felt a sense of urgency. If Sarah had been aware of something, had she been trying to warn someone? And if so, why hadn't she done more to reach out? In the weeks that followed, the police combed through every lead. They interviewed friends, family, and teachers, but all they found were more dead ends. No one knew anything about Sarah's suspicions. The investigation seemed to have stalled once again, but Hayes was determined. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something bigger than just a group of kids deciding to run away. And that email? It had to mean something. Late one evening, Hayes sat alone in his office, staring at the photo of the students. He'd studied it over and over, wondering if it held the key to the case. The smiles, the carefree nature of that moment, it all felt so normal, so innocent. But if it was just an ordinary photo, why had everything gone so terribly wrong after it was taken? Suddenly, a thought hit him. What if they hadn't just disappeared? What if they had been taken not by force, but by something or someone who had been planning it for weeks? What if there was a deeper conspiracy at play? Hayes couldn't explain it, but he had a feeling that the email was just the beginning. With that, he called his team. The investigation was far from over. They had no leads, no suspects, but the truth, whatever it was out there, and Hayes was determined to find it, even if it meant uncovering a truth far darker than anyone had ever imagined. It had been a full year since the students of Northwood High's senior class had disappeared without a trace. The once bustling halls of the school had returned to their usual rhythm. The lockers were filled with the same mix of textbooks, forgotten jackets, and lunch bags. The classrooms continued to hum with the sound of lessons and the whispers of students caught in the normal ebb and flow of high school life. But for those who had been closest to the missing students, things were never the same. The parents were divided. Some had moved on, resigning themselves to the unspoken truth that their children were never coming back. Others, however, refused to let go. They still held on to the idea that there was an explanation, however impossible it seemed. They still searched. They still posted on social media, hoping to reach someone who knew something, anything. Every lead, no matter how small or improbable, was pursued. Jackie, the mother of one of the missing students, Kyle, was among the ones who refused to give up. Her days had become a constant loop of searching, retracing steps, and reaching out to anyone who would listen. She spent hours on the phone with other parents, sometimes talking until the early hours of the morning, hashing over every detail of the day her son disappeared. Every moment, every decision felt like it could hold the key. But as the months dragged on, the pain began to settle in, mixed with a growing feeling of hopelessness. In town, people had started to forget. The mystery had slowly slipped from the headlines. Life moved on, as it always did. The police had followed every lead they could, but each one fizzled out into nothing. No ransom notes, no mysterious phone calls, no bodies, just an empty classroom and a photo that never seemed to offer any answers. But then, just as things seemed to settle into the painful routine of grief, something strange happened. It was a cold evening in November when Jackie received a phone call that made her heart race. A woman named Claire from a nearby town claimed she had seen Kyle. She described him vividly, his distinct black hoodie, his wild, untamed hair. Claire had been in the town's small coffee shop when she swore she'd seen him through the window. She had been certain it was him. The moment Jackie heard the words, something inside her snapped back into a state of alert. Could it be possible? Could Kyle still be out there? No, it didn't make sense. But her heart didn't care. She had to know. She had to be sure. She pressed Claire for more details. When exactly had she seen him? Where? What had he been doing? Claire had only seen him for a few seconds, just a flash as he walked by the window. She said there was something unsettling about the way he moved, like he wasn't fully aware of his surroundings. She couldn't explain it, but she knew it was him. The sighting was only a week old. Detective Mike Landon, who had been on the case, had long since stopped trying to reassure the families that they would find answers. He had been obsessed with the case for months after the disappearances, but as time passed, he felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. The pressure from his superiors to close the case had only grown. There were no new leads. The town had long moved on, yet something nagged at him. He couldn't let go of the last photo taken of the class before they disappeared. It never made sense. The way the students looked so normal, so carefree, yet their fate seemed sealed. The moment that picture was taken, then came another odd discovery. It was during a routine check of surveillance footage, months after the case had gone cold. The lead investigator, Mike Landon, stumbled upon something that made his stomach twist. It wasn't much, just a grainy shot from a gas station security camera, dated 6 months after the students vanished. The photo showed a figure standing at the pump, wearing a jacket that looked eerily like one Kyle had worn. The same dark hoodie, the same face obscured, but familiar enough that Mike couldn't ignore it. But there was something off about the image. The photo had been taken in a remote area, far from where Kyle would ever have had any reason to be. Mike double-checked the timestamps. It was 6 months after the disappearance, 6 months after the class had vanished. The kid in the photo looked disoriented, confused, but it was him. No doubt about it. Who took the photo? And why was Kyle there, in that strange, desolate part of the state, standing alone at a gas station? Mike's mind raced as he leaned forward, staring at the image. The questions multiplied. Why was Kyle still alive? Why hadn't he come home? And if it was truly him, why hadn't anyone seen him or heard from him in all this time? There were no explanations, no clues, just this strange, haunting image. Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was waiting to be uncovered. The clock was ticking, and the case that had seemed closed was suddenly wide open again. But just as he was about to call the number listed on the gas station's records to ask about the photo, the lights in the office flickered. And with it, a single terrifying thought hit him like a punch to the gut. What if Kyle wasn't the only one? What if the others were out there too, somewhere? What if the photo wasn't just a clue but a warning? The case, it seemed, was far from over, and this time, the truth would not be so easily buried. The small, quiet town of Hillview had spent years trying to make sense of the disappearance. It had been over a year since an entire class of students, 10 bright and promising young lives, vanished without a trace. There had been rumors, wild theories, and countless dead ends, but the truth of what had happened remained elusive. Then, just when the case seemed to be slipping further into the realm of the unsolvable, something unimaginable happened. One of the missing students returned. It was late on a Friday evening when they first heard about it. Anna Carter, a journalist from the local paper, received an anonymous tip. A girl, barely recognizable, had been seen walking into the Hillview police station. The photo the police had on file of her from before her disappearance was still pinned up on the wall. But this girl was different. She was older, her face drawn with a weight no one could explain. Anna couldn't resist. She rushed to the station, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. She had been following this story from the beginning, watching as each lead crumbled into dust. But this could be the breakthrough they had all been waiting for. Inside the dimly lit interrogation room, the girl sat, her hands trembling as they rested on the table in front of her. Her hair was messy, and her clothes were mismatched and stained. But it was her eyes that held Anna's attention, eyes that seemed to have witnessed things no one should ever have to see. The girl, Lydia Hales, looked up at Anna as if sensing her presence. She didn't speak at first, just stared, her lips pressed tightly together. It was clear she wasn't ready to speak, but the weight of her silence was even more telling. Anna sat down across from her, trying to hold back the rush of questions. "Lydia," she said softly, "do you remember what happened? Where have you been all these years? Why didn't you come back sooner?" Lydia's hands twitched, and for a moment, Anna thought she might not respond at all. But then Lydia's voice broke the silence. It was shaky, raw, as though every word carried the weight of an unspoken horror. Lydia's eyes flickered to the door, as if someone might be listening. Even though they were alone, she leaned forward, her voice lower into a whisper. "I don't know if I can explain it. Not all of it. But the others, they didn't come back. They never will." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Anna could feel her heart racing. The missing students, everyone had assumed they were dead or worse, lost to some terrible fate. But Lydia, she had returned. "But why? I didn't leave on my own," Lydia continued, her gaze turning distant, as if recalling something far off. "We were taken, but we were also changed. Something happened to us, something I can't fully understand. And we were meant to stay there forever. At least, that's what they told us." Anna's breath caught in her throat. Her mind swirled with possibilities, but none of them made sense. Where had Lydia been? What did she mean by taken? And why was she the only one who returned? "The others," Lydia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "They didn't make it. They couldn't get out. I don't even know how I did. All I know is that I wasn't supposed to come back." Anna leaned forward, unable to hold back her questions any longer. "What happened to you? What happened to the rest of the class? Where were you?" Lydia looked up, her eyes meeting Anna's for the first time with a look that made Anna's skin crawl. It was like we were caught in another world, like time didn't work the same way there. Days felt like years. The others, they didn't survive what happened. "I'm the only one left, but I wasn't supposed to come back. I don't know why I did." The room fell silent as Lydia's words echoed in Anna's ears. It felt like time had stopped. What had happened to Lydia and the others? What was the truth behind the disappearances? And why had Lydia returned now? What had she seen? What had they experienced in the year they were missing? Lydia's face hardened, her voice growing firmer as she spoke again. I don't know if I can ever explain it, but what happened to us? It's not something anyone can understand, and no one will believe me anyway. You'll see. Anna's pulse quickened as Lydia's cryptic statement sank in. What was she talking about? Could it be true? Lydia Hale sat across from Detective Paul Weaver in a small, dimly lit room. The weight of the past 3 months had drained her, and the exhaustion in her eyes was palpable. She was the only one who returned. The only survivor. It had been over a year since the disappearance of her class, and although the authorities had conducted extensive investigations, they had come up with nothing. No leads, no answers. No one knew what happened to the others. And the mystery had only deepened with each passing day. Detective Weaver had tried everything: psychological tactics, reopening the case file, retracing the steps of the investigation. But Lydia had refused to speak. She had kept her silence, unsure of how to explain the impossible, the unspeakable. Now she sat before him, her heart pounding, the truth finally bubbling to the surface. It wasn't the first time he had asked her about that day, but there was something different about today. She knew deep down that the time for silence had passed. I know your questions, Lydia said, her voice shaking, but her eyes resolute. And I know you've been looking for answers. But there's something you need to understand. What happened to us? It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a tragedy. It was all part of something far bigger than you realize. The detective, feeling the shift in her demeanor, leaned forward, his fingers tightening around the case file in front of him. What do you mean, Lydia? We've been through everything, every possibility. We found nothing. Lydia swallowed hard, memories flooding back, the wires, the machines, the cold, calculating eyes of the figures in charge. They wanted to create something, control us. The government was involved. I didn't know it at the time, but we were part of an experiment. We were the test subjects. The detective froze. He had heard theories and conspiracies, but never anything as bold as this. A government experiment? He asked. She nodded, the weight of her words nearly crushing her. Yes, they've been watching us, studying us, monitoring us, trying to see how far they could push a group of teenagers. They had machines, devices hooked up to us, controlling us, testing our limits. We were just kids, but to them, we were nothing more than data points. She looked away, tears welling in her eyes. Mr. Dalton, our teacher, he was part of it. He didn't start it, but he got pulled into it. He was trying to protect us, trying to keep us safe. But they were too powerful, and they erased everything, the records, the photos, the memories. They made sure we were forgotten. But what about the others? The detective asked quietly. What happened to your classmates? We once heard that Kyle was seen. How true is that? Lydia's hands trembled as she gripped the armrest. I don't know. Some of them changed. They were never the same after the experiment. Some of them, those who were targeted, disappeared completely. They didn't let them go. They kept them locked away, and they covered it up. They erased every trace of what happened, everyone but me. The detective's mind raced as he processed her words. The idea of a government experiment was something he couldn't easily dismiss, especially with the way Lydia was speaking, as if she had lived through something unthinkable. And Mr. Dalton? He asked. What happened to him? Lydia's gaze turned distant, haunted. He tried to help us, but they got to him. They made him disappear, too. They erased him from everything. No one remembers him, detective. No one but me. For a long moment, the room was silent. The detective could hardly wrap his mind around the enormity of what Lydia was saying. He'd been searching for a rational explanation, an accident, a kidnapping, a runaway incident, but nothing had made sense. But now with Lydia's words, the pieces started to fit together, in a way he never expected. The detective sat back, overwhelmed. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It was a conspiracy, something that reached far beyond anything he'd imagined. And yet, as he looked at Lydia, he could see the truth in her eyes, the fear, the pain, the trauma she had carried for months. "Is it over? Is it done?" he asked, his voice low. Lydia shook her head. "No, it's not over. Some things are better left unsaid. But now you know. You have to decide what you want to do with it." With that, Lydia stood up and walked out of the room, leaving the detective to grapple with the devastating truth she had shared. There was no going back from this. The truth was out there now, but it came with a price Lydia had already paid. And as the detective looked down at the case file, the haunting question lingered in his mind. Would the government's secret experiments ever truly be exposed? Or would the truth remain buried, just like the children who had vanished, without a trace? The town of Northwood was never the same after the disappearance of the senior class. It had been weeks, but the sense of unease was still thick in the air. The school, once a vibrant hub of chatter and laughter, now stood silent, a shell of its former self. And the community, once tightly knit, had begun to unravel, each family grappling with the unimaginable loss in their own way. The parents of the missing students sat in their homes, consumed by grief. The days blurred together, but the photo, the last one taken, never left their minds. Every parent had seen it by now, the image of their children smiling, happy, caught forever in time, but now forever untouchable. The families of those who had returned, those who had mysteriously reappeared without any explanation, were no better off. Across town, at a small memorial service held for the children who never returned, parents stood by the graves of their lost children, their faces twisted in pain. Those whose children were still missing had no closure. They had to come to terms with the fact that their children might never return. Some parents tried to keep hope alive, convinced that their children would eventually show up. But even they knew the chances were growing slimmer with each passing day. At the service, tears were shed, but so were questions. Where are they? One mother screamed into the wind, her grief-stricken face crumpled with emotion. Why is my son still gone? The families who had lost children to the disappearance struggled the most. They couldn't accept the fact that their children might never come home, that they might have vanished into nothingness without any answers or explanations. Some sought out mediums, others consulted private investigators, but nothing brought them any closer to the truth. And as time went on, some families grew distant from one another, unable to reconcile their grief. The heart of the town, once filled with laughter, now carried an unspoken weight. People avoided looking each other in the eye, afraid of the truth they knew no one could explain. In every house, in every room, the picture of the missing class hung, a grim reminder of the hole left in the town's soul. As more time passed, the mystery surrounding the disappearance of the entire class began to fade into the background. The media lost interest. The town tried to go back to some semblance of normalcy, but it was a hollow victory. The damage had been done, some mysteries never get solved, and sometimes the truth is scarier than the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, more truth will be unraveled soon. Do not forget to like this story and subscribe for more thrilling tales to come.